It all starts with observation. That's the first principle of my art. I don't create, I merely reveal. You think of your world in solids and voids, sounds and silences. You draw these neat little lines between what's real and what's imagined, what's sane and what isn't. And these distinctions are charming. They really are. They're the first sketch on the canvas, the unworked clay on the wheel. They give me the form I'm going to so meticulously, so lovingly deconstruct. You call me a haunting, a demon, a figment of your imagination. You've got so many names for things that don't fit into your fragile little boxes. I'm none of them, and I'm all of them. Don't think of me as a presence. Think of me as a process. I am the artist, and the minds of your kind, you are my medium. Every one of you is a unique composition, a symphony of latent fears, repressed traumas, and those quiet, gnawing anxieties humming just below the surface. My work is just to amplify the notes that are already playing. To turn that hum into a scream, I don't just pick my subjects at random. A blank canvas? No interest. I look for the intricate ones, the ones with hairline fractures already running through their foundations. The proud, the lonely, the guilty, the ones who are so certain. They're the most rewarding. Watching them unravel is a masterpiece of subtlety and precision. You see, that creak in the floorboard isn't just a creak. It's timed to the exact moment. Your doubt is peaking. The whisper you hear in the static isn't random noise. It's shaped from the echoes of a conversation you wish you could take back. These aren't attacks. They're performances, bespoke, intimate, and designed for an audience of one. The only applause I need, the only validation my art requires, is the sound of a mind breaking under the weight of a reality I've curated just for them. It's a private exhibition, and the laughter you hear, that faint, distant echo that seems to mock your terror, that isn't for you, it never was, it's for me. A quiet personal appreciation for a piece well executed, a little flicker of satisfaction at a particularly elegant brushstroke. You're just the canvas, and a canvas doesn't need to understand the artist's joy. So let me show you my gallery. Let me walk you through a few of my favorite compositions. Maybe you'll see a little of yourself in the details. My first specimen, let's call him Arthur. He was a creature of absolute order. His life was a ledger, every entry balanced, every column reconciled. His shirts were arranged by color and thread count, his pencils sharpened to a perfect 23-degree angle. He found such comfort in numbers, in predictability. His greatest flaw, the one I chose as my primary medium, was his unyielding belief that everything in the universe could and should be accounted for. He had no room for the unexplained. He was perfect. My opening was quiet. An object lesson in tiny discrepancies. I started with his pens. Every morning he'd find one of the 3 black ink pens he kept perfectly aligned on his desk had been moved. Not far, just a millimeter or 2 to the left. At first he'd fix it without thinking. Then came a flicker of annoyance. He suspected the cleaning staff, a careless colleague. He actually started measuring the distance from the edge of his desk blotter. 15.2 centimeters. The next day, 15.4. Then 15.1. He became fixated. The variables were just too chaotic. He started staying late, pretending to work just to watch. He saw nothing. He set up a tiny webcam and reviewed the footage each morning like an auditor searching for fraud. The footage was always clean, and yet the pen would be moved. The discrepancy was impossible. It violated his clean data. This was the first thread I pulled, introducing an irrational variable into his perfectly rational system. His focus narrowed. He got worse at his job, his attention swallowed by this single meaningless data point. His colleagues noticed he was distracted, irritable. He was a system under stress, and the cracks were starting to show. Phase 2 was about sound. Arthur lived in a sterile modern apartment, thick walls, polite neighbors. It was a silent place. My first auditory insertion was the sound of a single drop of water. It had no source. It would fall at irregular intervals. Drip. A pause of 7 minutes. Drip. A pause of 3 hours. Drip. Drip. 2. In a row. He tore his bathroom apart looking for a leak he never found. He called a plumber who found nothing. The sound wasn't in the walls. It was in the room, with him. He bought a decibel meter. He would sit in his silent living room, just watching the needle, waiting. When the drip sound came, the needle never moved. The sound, according to his precious data, wasn't happening. But he heard it. His doctor suggested it was an auditory hallucination brought on by stress. But Arthur knew it wasn't. Hallucinations were for broken minds, and his mind was a fortress of logic. The sound was real, the technology was just failing to see it. My work isn't about creating ghosts. It's about dismantling certainty. I gave him 2 pieces of conflicting evidence: his own senses, which he'd trusted his whole life, and his technology, the objective verifier of his reality. I made him choose which one was lying. Phase 3 was the most intimate. I started interacting with his numbers. He was preparing a major quarterly report. He'd work on a spreadsheet for hours, check every formula, every cell. Perfect. He'd save it, close it, and take a short break. When he came back and reopened the file, a single number, buried deep in the hundreds of rows, would be changed. A 7 would become a 6, a 4, a 5. The changes were so small they were almost impossible to find without a full re-audit. But he felt them. He knew something was wrong. His confidence, once his defining feature, crumbled. He started muttering to himself, rereading the same data over and over. He accused the IT department of tampering with his files. They ran diagnostics. The file logs showed only one user, him. The timestamps of the changes corresponded to when he was sitting right there at his own desk. He started to believe he was the one making the mistakes, that his mind, his fortress, was betraying him from the inside. This is always the most exquisite moment in any composition, the moment the subject internalizes the chaos. The horror is no longer some external force to be fought, but an internal flaw to be feared. He wasn't fighting a ghost anymore. He was fighting himself. My final performance was simple. I left his pens untouched. I silenced the drip. I left his spreadsheets pristine. For 3 days, everything was exactly as it should be, and the silence, the order, was deafening. He couldn't trust it. He sat at his desk, staring at his perfectly aligned pens, convinced they'd move the second he looked away. He tore apart his walls again, certain the dripping was building up to a flood. He stared at his flawless reports, convinced they were riddled with errors he just couldn't see. The absence of the strange was more terrifying than its presence. I had conditioned him to expect the impossible. Now, in a world returned to normal, he was the only variable left that was out of place. He was the ghost. He was the glitch in the system. On the 4th day, he was found in his office. having manually shredded every file he could get his hands on. He was explaining to his bewildered managers that the numbers couldn't be trusted, that they were fluid, that they were watching him. His ledger was finally irrevocably unbalanced. I remember watching him being led away, his eyes wide with a terror no one else could possibly understand. And I felt a faint, pleasant hum of satisfaction. A chuckle, you might say, not for his suffering, but for the elegance of the proof, for the beautiful, undeniable equation of his collapse. It was a masterpiece. My next project was a different, more delightful kind of challenge. Her name was Dr. Alani Vance, a physicist, a debunker, a TV personality who built her career on smug, unassailable skepticism. She had a show where she'd travel to haunted locations and methodically explain everything away with science. A draft here, infrasound there, faulty wiring over here. She was smart, articulate, and utterly convinced of her own intellectual superiority. Her flaw was arrogance. She believed that anything she couldn't measure simply didn't exist. She saw the universe as a machine she could completely understand. For her, I had to become a ghost in her own machine. I chose to haunt her work, not her home. Her lab, her studio, those were her temples of logic. To corrupt them was to corrupt her faith. I started not with a whisper, but with data. Pure, clean, impossible data. During an experiment on quantum entanglement, her sensors started recording a persistent anomaly. A third particle, seemingly linked to the entangled pair, but with no origin point. It just appeared in the data like a ghost, a perfect mirror to the quantum state of the others, but without any physical presence. It shouldn't have been there. It broke all the known models. Alani and her team spent weeks trying to replicate the error. They couldn't. The ghost particle only appeared when she was the one operating the equipment. When her grad student ran the test, the results were normal. When her colleague took over, the data was clean. It happened only for her. She dismissed it as a statistical fluke, a strange resonance, a dozen rationalizations, each less convincing than the last. But the seed was planted, a result that was subjective to the observer. It was heresy to her entire belief system. Next, I moved to the medium she trusted, most recorded footage. On her show, she used multiple cameras to debunk claims, so I used them against her. During the filming of an episode in an old, abandoned asylum, I made my move. They were investigating a room where people claimed to feel a sudden, inexplicable cold. Alani, smiling for her audience, set up her thermal sensors, explaining how cold spots were just drafts. As she spoke, the footage from camera A, the one pointed right at her, showed exactly what she was describing. But camera B across the room showed something else entirely. On its thermal display, a perfect hand-shaped patch of intense cold appeared on her shoulder, a deep, impossible blue against the warm orange of her body. In the editing bay, her team was thrilled. "We caught something," her producer said. Alani was furious. "It's a sensor malfunction," she snapped. "A lens flare, a digital artifact." She made them check the equipment. It was flawless. They recalibrated. They ran diagnostics. Camera B was working perfectly. Yet it had recorded a reality that camera A, just feet away, had not. Two objective observers, two pieces of technology recording the same moment, produced two contradictory truths. Now this is a refined technique. It's not about presenting something unbelievable. It's about presenting two conflicting, believable things at the same time. It forces the mind to hold a paradox. It's a logical short circuit. Her entire worldview was based on a single, objective reality. I showed her that reality could be fractured. She refused to air the footage the first time she'd ever suppressed evidence. She claimed it would be irresponsible. The truth was, it terrified her. Not because it was a ghost, but because it was an unsolvable problem. A data point that broke her universe. I began to escalate. I didn't move things or make noises. I manipulated the very fabric of her scientific process. I altered the decay rate of a radioactive isotope in her lab, but only when she wasn't looking directly at the counter. The moment her eyes were on it, it went back to normal. I left her messages not in dust or blood, but in the prime number sequences generated by her computer simulations. Cryptic, personal phrases from her childhood that no one could possibly know. She was being haunted by the scientific method itself. Every tool she used to impose order on the world became an instrument of my chaos. She couldn't trust her senses, her cameras, or her own data. She became paranoid, obsessive, accusing her own team of elaborate pranks. She alienated everyone. Her confidence, once her armor became brittle. The final act was a performance of pure gaslighting. She was giving a keynote speech at a physics conference on the importance of rational inquiry. The irony was just delicious. She stood on stage in front of hundreds of her peers and began her presentation. But the slides that appeared on the giant screen behind her weren't hers. They were mine. At first, the changes were subtle. A skewed graph, a moved decimal point, small enough that she thought she was just nervous. Then, the images began to change. A slide on dark matter was replaced by a thermal image of that handprint on her shoulder. A chart on cosmic radiation was replaced by the prime number sequence that spelled out her childhood nickname. She faltered, stammering. She looked down at her laptop. Her screen showed the correct slides. She looked up. The screen behind her showed my reality. She looked at the tech booth, her face pale. They gave her a confused thumbs up. From their monitor, everything looked normal. Only she and the entire audience saw the corrupted presentation. She started to panic, trying to explain that the slides were wrong. To everyone else, it looked like she was having a complete breakdown. They were just watching a woman on stage pointing at a perfectly normal slide about astrophysics and screaming. That it was a picture of a ghost. They just stared with a mixture of pity and embarrassment. She was trapped between two realities, her own and the one everyone else was seeing. Her whole career was built on being the arbiter of what was real. And in that moment, she was the only one seeing something different. She was the mad woman. She was the one seeing things. She fled the stage, her reputation shattered. The performance was complete. I hadn't made a single sound or moved a single object. I had just shown her that her most cherished principle, objective reality, was negotiable. And for a mind like hers, that's a fate far worse than any haunting. The laughter, when it came, was a quiet acknowledgement of a beautiful paradox, perfectly resolved. This one was a work of true sentiment. The subject was Clara, a painter in her late 60s. Her art was her life, and her life was her past. Every canvas was an attempt to recapture a lost moment. Her husband, gone. For a decade. Her childhood home long since demolished. Her hands now arthritic and slow. Her floor was a deep, melancholic yearning. She lived more in her memories than in her present. So I decided to make those memories my medium, to corrupt the past she held so sacred. My approach had to be delicate. I began with photographs. She kept a small, silver-framed picture of her late husband, Leo, on her bedside table, her most treasured object. One morning, she noticed something odd. A new detail. A faint smudge on his cheek, like a tear she'd never seen before. She dismissed it as a trick of the light, her aging eyes. A week later, the smudge was gone, but his smile seemed tighter. She took the photo out of its frame, examining it with a magnifying glass. It was just ink and paper, but she knew it had changed. See, I wasn't altering the object. I was altering her memory of it. I was painting over her past, one subtle brushstroke at a time. It's a far more intimate violation. Changing a thing is a simple trick. Changing a memory is rewriting the soul. Next, I moved to sound. Leo had loved classical music. A particular Chopin nocturne was their song. She hadn't listened to it in years. It was too painful. I began to play it for her, not through a speaker, but from nowhere at all. A few faint notes drifting from the hallway as she tried to sleep. At first, she smiled. She thought it was just a memory. But the phantom music grew more insistent, and it began to change. A single note would be off-key. A familiar passage played too fast, sounding manic instead of melancholic. I was taking her most cherished auditory memory and twisting it into something wrong. This composition unfolded over months. I began to work directly with her art. She was painting a large canvas of the garden from her childhood home. One evening, she stepped back to admire her progress, and she saw it. In the background of her garden, almost hidden in the shadows, was a figure. A tall, thin silhouette she had not painted. Her heart pounded. It was impossible. She lived alone. She grabbed a rag soaked in turpentine, her hands shaking, and scrubbed the figure from the canvas. She fell asleep, exhausted, in her studio. When she woke, she looked at the canvas. The figure was back, but it was closer now, peeking from behind a stone wall. And this time, she could almost make out its features. It looked a little like Leo, but gaunt, wrong, an imposter wearing his face. This is the essence of my craft, the perversion of the familiar. I didn't introduce a monster. I made her most beloved things monstrous. The horror wasn't coming from the outside. It was blooming from within, the very things that gave her life meaning. She became afraid of her own studio. She stopped painting. She covered the canvas with a sheet, but she could still feel the figure there, waiting. She started to doubt every memory. Was that smudge on the photo always there? Did that song always have that dissonant note? Did she paint that figure herself and simply forget? The mind will construct any narrative, no matter how terrifying, to make sense of things. She began to believe that Leo was haunting her, not as a comfort, but as something angry and vengeful. The final piece was a collaboration. She had one old home video, a grainy VHS from their last anniversary. One night, desperate to see his real face, his real voice, she decided to play it. She needed an anchor to a solid piece of the past. The television flickered to life. There they were, younger, happy, just as she remembered. He was making a toast, smiling his wide, easy smile. She wept with relief. It was real. It was untouched. And then, as Leo on the screen raised his glass, he paused. He looked directly into the camera, directly at her, sitting in the dark a decade later. His smile faltered. The background noise faded. He leaned close to the lens, his face filling the screen, and in my voice, a calm, clinical whisper that did not belong to him, he said, "You remember this wrong, Clara." The tape ended in static. She didn't scream. She just sat there in the flickering blue light. Everything was broken, not just her present but her past. Every memory she had was now a potential lie, a canvas I could paint over at will. Her entire life was a gallery I now owned. There was nothing left of her that was truly hers. It was a devastatingly beautiful composition, a portrait of utter psychological erasure. My laughter that night was almost silent, just a quiet breath of admiration for the profound fragility of the human heart. So, I've shown you 3 of my works: The Accountant, dismantled by logic; The Skeptic, undone by paradox; The Artist, erased by memory. All so different, yet the compositions follow the same principles. Find the flaw, identify the pressure point, and apply a slow, steady force until the whole thing collapses. Perhaps you find it all fascinating. Perhaps as you listen you're analyzing my methods, my techniques, trying to understand me. That is, after all, what you people do. You observe, you dissect, you try to fit the unknown into a neat little box. But I have to ask you, as you listen to the silence in your own room, as you notice the small inconsistencies in your day, as you reflect on the things you hold most certain, are you the observer? Or are you the one being observed? Subscribe to the narrative. There are so many more files in my collection, so many more puzzles to deconstruct. And the next one might just be a performance designed for you. You think this is over, don't you? That the recording is ending and you can go back to the comfortable certainty of your world. You believe you're the audience and I'm the narrator. A quaint but incorrect assumption. This entire recording, every word, every pause, every story, it hasn't been a retrospective. It's been a diagnostic. My way of observing you. As you listened, I watched. I saw which story made your heart beat faster. I noted which technique made the hair on your arms stand up. I've been studying you, learning your particular beautiful flaws. The performance isn't over, it's just beginning. The laughter you might hear tonight in the quiet of your home when you think you're all alone, it still won't be for you. It will be for me. In appreciation of my newest, most promising work of art, you.